what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a couple of the presets that I've made and how I went about making them. So this will be a good crash course in the basics of subtractive synthesis, and it'll also be a really great way to see this plugin because it is super powerful. So without much further ado, what I'll do is I'll just solo this and you'll be able to hear the sound that I've made in the last sort of hour or so. So as you can see, or as you can hear, very fat sounds coming in from Lion here. And if you don't know about Unfiltered Audio, they're a great company, and they've been making some amazing, very innovative plugins in recent times, including things like Biome, which allowed you to create your own sort of custom modular rooted effect plugins essentially. So think very similar to like a Max for Live style environment, but a little bit more modular, a little bit more obvious as to how you can plug things in and out, because you can see I've got some cables flying around here as well. And what you'll have heard is that sound get a lot more intense. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to just flip over to the other camera and you'll be able to see I've programmed this through the use of the mod wheel here. So if I just get my fat head out the way, you'll be able to see as I move the mod wheel up and down on my keyboard here, you'll see several controls changing at the same time. So we'll get into how the modulation routines are in effect through the building of this preset, but I'll play this to you again and you'll be able to see now with the mod wheel exactly how the sound gets more intense. So yeah, so I'll throw a little beat in there for you, just keep you guys keen, so to speak. Yeah, so it's a very lively sound, and again, very typical of obviously my own production style, but if you consider what is big in sort of like the more underground styles of like melodic house and techno, melodic techno, progressive stuff at the moment, you're talking it's a pretty decent thing here. So as you can hear, it's a pretty fat thing going on. So what I want to do is I want to just sort of break this down into little pieces so you can see what's going on here and give you a bit of a tour, because honestly, as synthesizers go, this has got to be one of the easiest, most navigable, most flexible, yet most powerful synths I think I've ever used in my entire life. So this is a phenomenal achievement by the Unfiltered guys, and they've been kind of working in this direction. If you do look at their other plugins again, like Biome, etc., they're phenomenally simple to use. So if I was to just head up to the top menu here, I'm just going to reset everything to defaults. And what we'll do is we'll essentially create something very similar using the techniques that I used to create this. So let's go for a little bit of a tour. I mean, if I can play a couple of notes to start off. Very similar, very typical kind of subtractive kind of sound. And you've got two oscillators here. Now, that might seem quite limited compared to other oscillators or compared to other synths that are out there. But actually, it masks a power that is very interesting, because if I was to just sort of drop into this menu here, you've got classic types of oscillators. So this one here, the forms, very much allows you to work in a similar way to a wavetable synth. Very similar to, say, Massive in particular, where you can crossfade between a triangle and a sine wave, and also a sawtooth and a square wave within the same oscillator. So that's actually quite a powerful thing to be able to do. So when you have two of these now, it allows you to get some really, really powerful blends of oscillators and very, very big sounds straight off the bat. And then you have things like ring modulated oscillators. You have sine waves being passed through like a wave folder distortion, and also as well moving into FM. It's a very capable FM synth where, say for example, if I was to put this in 4-op parallel, you are starting to get into similar territory as the likes of FM8 and Operator within Ableton. And then the stacks are particularly interesting because you have things like super saws and super squares, etc., etc. And then you also have a couple of granular oscillators, which is very, very interesting because essentially it's doing some real-time granular resynthesis. There's some experimental stuff which I haven't quite tried to get into just yet because I'm still navigating my way around. And again, just the simple stuff like here's a sawtooth wave, here's a square wave, here's a triangle, just the basics that you'll probably be used to working with if you've built your own sounds or modified presets with the likes of, Silent and Serum and everything else. Okay, so ultimately you've also got a noise generator in here as well. Ultimately, very, very flexible. But if we were to break the synth down, what we're essentially seeing here is that you have the oscillators and the tone generation here, and then the main output. In the middle, in this middle row here, is essentially just all effects. So that is all things like reverbs, delays, etc. And then at the bottom, everything to do with modulation. So as far as a synth goes, it really literally could not be simpler to use, where it's so simple to see exactly what is going on and where. So let's say, for example, we start with a very similar kind of sound to what we had before, and we sort of rebuild something, and then I'll play you a few presets of different types to finish off. So this is kind of like my default state. This is where I would start in any form of sound design, essentially. And what you'll see is on the piano roll here, if I just put that away for a second or put that up there, you'll see if I fold, you have a little bit of a bass stab there, which is a very usual, very, very typical kind of pattern for, the styles of music that we're into. So I tend to do this first and foremost. I'll just put in with the basic pattern that I'm trying to do the sound design with, which obviously at the moment sounds terrible. But what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to scroll over within Lion here. And also as well, if you want to, you can double click and you can start to put a lot of these modules into a smaller space so you can fit everything into a plugin window. So here I've got a master ADSR. And what I can do here is I can change the envelope of the whole sound. So if I just play that through a couple of times, we're already into an interesting ballpark here. So what I want to do is I want to get that sort of classic movement going, but I want to try and really switch up the flavor a little bit across the board, and there's loads of different ways to do this, because this essentially is a new form of synthesis. This is not something that is trying to emulate a Moog or a Jupiter 8 or anything that those great companies that do that kind of thing are all over, and they do very well. This is really trying to push the boat in a new direction, and this is where I think it's a really exciting development, and that's why I'm really, really happy to be writing some presets for this. So ultimately, we've only got the one oscillator on at the moment, which is all you can hear. If I was to add the second one in here, you can see the second oscillator has come up for mixing, essentially, because this is like a mixer. And I can go in for linear or equal crossfades, and I can do minimum maximum, which is again more of like a balance type vibe. I can ring modulate both oscillators together. I can also do these things: terrain, bitter, ash, and they have very different qualities about how they mix the oscillators together. So again, if you think about the likes of Massive or Silent or Serum or any of those other synths out there that do it the traditional way, you basically just get level controls and that's it. Whereas with Lion, it's starting to push things in a bit more of an esoteric kind of direction, a bit more of a creative direction, because essentially the way that you combine these oscillators together is kind of up for grabs and is open to creative interpretation, which is brilliant. So ultimately, if I was to now, because I've got the ADSR where I want it for this sort of shorter, pluckier sound, this is kind of an insight into my sound design point of view as well, where I'll tend to get the waves in the right kind of setting, or set the first oscillator up, and then the next thing that I'll do is that I'll go and get the envelope right, because the envelope is obviously an incredibly important part of the sound overall. And as you can hear, when I've dropped the sustain and the release out, it kind of just fell into place a little bit more, and it's the shape that I want it to be, even without using a filter. And then I can start to shape and do some interesting things with the oscillators themselves. So let's go on one oscillator at a time. So I'm going to drop out with the forms on the second part here, and then I'm going to start looking at how I can do some interesting stuff. So if I start playing around here, you can see you can tune the whole thing, and then you can use a sub oscillator as well, which is quite cool. Or again, as I say, I can crossfade between a sine wave and a triangle. So on the one side, I've got sine wave triangle. On the other side, I've got saw and square. So let's go for a saw wave. So I'll pull this all the way over. And this blend control is essentially a crossfade. It's essentially a mixer within the oscillator. As you can hear there, that's more of your combination of the sine wave triangle. So essentially we're moving towards one oscillator or the other here. And I quite like that actually as a combination, where the blend is mostly over towards the saw square. But again, I've let a little bit of square in. And again, at 50%, I've got an equal vibe of sine wave triangle going on. So within this one overall oscillator, I've actually got 4 waves going on at the same time, which means it starts to sound very rich straight away. So if I wanted to now, I could add in the forms, the secondary one, and I can use this a bit more like a sub oscillator. So I'll tune the whole thing down by an octave. So you can hear already it's starting to really come together. And I can do various different things from here. Obviously, I've got various different filter modes. This is not the only time you're going to see a filter here in the next few minutes, because this is like your main filter. But within this effects section as well, I can add in a basic filter. And if I click on the little library icon here, I've got a number of different ones, including resonator banks, a comb filter, which is a very big part of that preset that I played here initially, and a host of others. So yeah, very easy. I can just right click here, I can reset, I can randomize. We're going to do a little bit more on randomization in a moment, and we're going to remove the effect there. So the next thing is, before we add any sort of effects, I like to essentially try and get the sound as close to finished as possible. So again, this is my whole approach, right? I try and use the raw materials as well as possible. So again, I've got a 12 dB per octave filter here. You can see that's moving. I've got a really good oscilloscope or waveform oscillator sort of visualization tool there, which is easier for me to say. And then I can just roll off. And you can just hear the richness of that tone, especially if I was to just adjust this here, move this back to the top corner, and if I was to just take the solo off there on my keyboard, So as you can hear there, it's got a nice little vibe to it. And if I just solo that again, you'll be able to kind of get an appreciation that actually we're still not 100% on the game. We're at 0 dB, but we've got another sort of 8 or 9 dB there to work with. So if we wanted to kind of give this a bit more level, we could. However, the way that we can do that is interesting because I can jump into an effects module here and you'll see distortions. And you've got various different ones here. You've got bit crushers, you've got, rectifiers, you've got overdrive, saturation, style effects, wave folders, etc., etc. But the one I've been getting the most joy out of is this one called Contrast, which sounds really, really good. So let's have a little play of that. So as you can hear there, I've got a really nice movement going on. And if I wanted to really bring out that kind of like squelchiness, if you will, I could always add the resonance in. So yeah, now we've got a little bit more power in the sound, a little bit more warmth. And now I can start to add some other elements to it to make it even more interesting. So let's look at like a basic delay, shall we? So we've got delays here and we've got various different ones. Let's start off with a classic sort of tape delay. I'm going to set that to like kind of my favorite setting, which is the 8th dotted. Just ramp a bit of feedback in there. So yeah, it's really starting to take shape now with the combination of that delay. And again, I can unlink the stereo here and I can actually have a secondary, which can be quite nice. So I'm going to draw that all the way back to a 16th. And I've got a filter here, which I can roll off some of the low end to make sure that this doesn't get too muddy as well. And a mix control, obviously, and I can just add in a little bit of wow, which if I throw this in quite drastically, as it says here, it sets the amount of pitch wobble on the tape. So this effect is much more noticeable with large feedback amounts. So we can actually get some really interesting stuff with this. So yeah, you're relying quite heavily on the effects, but really, really good stuff here and really fills the space in a beautiful way. And again, you don't really need much more now to really get this into a position where you could actually write a track with this sound. But then you'll also want to be able to take this again the stage further, because they've got this lovely resonance going on here, but I want things to kind of morph and really kind of move in real time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start getting into some of the modulation options, and then we'll skip back into some delays and various different effects and stuff as well. So if I open up here by double clicking, this is like a whole MIDI input modulation section. So as you saw initially when I opened up Lion, you could see that I had a number of different cables rolling around. So it is very reminiscent of a modular synthesis type setup where I can patch in various sources of modulation into various destinations and targets, and then decide how much of an influence that modulation source is going to have over the destination. So let's say, for example, I've been moving a cutoff up and down quite nicely over time here. I could do things like map a whole host of different MIDI input parameters. Like, say, for example, I could map note numbers to modulate the filter cutoff, or I could use velocity to change the mix of the delays. Here I've got the ability to use the mod wheel and the pitch bend wheel. So again, as you saw before, when I moved into the other camera here, when I actually utilized this at the beginning on the mod wheel, you could actually see that I was pretty much controlling several automatable parameters from the one control here. So it does make things very, very interesting from a performance standpoint, from an automation standpoint. Really gives you a lot more control, brings the sounds to life. So I can move along here, and as you can see, I've already tweaked the master ADSR. This is the ADSR envelope for the whole synth. So we're going to just put that away for a second. But nominally, on a preset, on the default preset, you get given a sine LFO. So this is a very simple LFO. What I can actually do is I can patch this out to control various aspects. So I'm actually going to patch this out. And you can see all I'll do is drag and drop onto, say, for example, a cutoff. And you can see that's moving already there with that white section. So if I play a section now, I'll play that loop again. So you get that whole range of movement there, which is quite a cool thing. And again, if I just unpick that cable there, just by dragging and dropping, you can see it goes back to a single output. So you've got the ability to take the output to drag it in to an input, but it grows another output, which means then I can decide how much of an influence the actual, if I just put that back on like 25% there, the actual parameter has. And then I can get some movements in real time there. And again, I've got a second target or a second output now that I can drop onto another modulation target. So this is really interesting because now things start to happen in real time and these sounds start to shift. So what I can also do is I can control the same parameter from multiple modulation sources. So I can take this mod wheel output, for example, drag and drop in, and now I have the ability, as you can see, I'm moving the mod wheel. You can see this on the camera in the bottom right corner as well as on the synth, that I'm moving the mod wheel and getting a lot of movement from that. So if I play that with the mod wheel, so you can hear that movement, the LFO and my movements on the mod wheel working very nicely in unison. Again, the amp is almost like the amount of influence. So you can see as I put the mod wheel up to the top there and I change the amp amount to like say 42%, it allows me to get a greater travel around the parameter. And again, me sort of playing along live and kind of jamming with the mod wheel just allows you to take things to another level. And if I really wanted to kind of push things again still further, I've got a secondary mod wheel output. And again, what I can do is I can take the output of that mod wheel, drag it into the output of the, or the input of the release on the master ADSR. So again, you'll see a bit of a thing happening here where you'll see in terms of modulators, inputs are on the bottom and then outputs are across the top. So it's very easy to read. So again, if I was to do something very similar here, you'll see the release of the ADSR really moving. And again, I can just tweak that a touch at its top level because it doesn't get too much. And again, that's now going to move with the cutoff, and it's also going to move with the LFO and with the release on the mod wheel. So again, you get that movement, you get that almost like the sound's alive in its own right. Then I can add in other elements. Again, I can add in another basic filter. But what I'm going to do here, I'm going to change that out. Select the comb filter. And again, the movement and the interest that this brings, even at very low mix levels, is pretty evident. So again, yeah, the aliveness of the sound is just incredible. And again, I can go a stage even further than that, because if I wanted to really push the envelope even further, I could do some pretty interesting things with the keyboard again, where aftertouch is concerned. So if I go here, you'll see the A column here is aftertouch, normalized value of aftertouch. So that means when I push on the key after I play it, it will essentially open things up still further. So if I play a few notes here, you'll be able to... Yeah, it's fairly stable, but then I can do things like, say for example, add in, especially at the higher releases, I can add in with the aftertouch, I can add in, again, a bit more extra feedback on the delay if I want to. So again, if I play a few notes and then... It is, I let go of the key, it kind of just dies. And you can hear it kind of die away there. And you can do other aspects, you can do other things with the aftertouch. Again, I could lengthen the release here, but I could also use the aftertouch as a way of opening up the filter. Actually, a better way of looking at it is to look at velocity this way as well. So again, if I play harder notes, I'll make that a little less sensitive. So the velocity can become really useful in that regard as well. So yeah, some really, really amazing stuff going on here. And again, I've actually got a reverb here, which I've not used yet, which I can just throw in. As you can hear, it's really, really nice and really quite rich sounding. And what I would probably do here as well, because you can actually add in an effect like this, you can actually grab them and you can move them as well. So I can actually put that probably before anything. Put a little high pass on there just to keep it nice and clean. A little low, little high pass, yeah. So yeah, on top of that, again, you could use the mod wheel yet again here to control things like the reverb mix. Just going to put a bit more damping on that because I want that to be, or in fact a bit less because I want it to be a bit more diffused. So yeah, I mean, very, very quickly we've gotten into some really beautiful territory here. And then we can actually go into a couple of things here just to really finish off. The mix is a very interesting part as well. Again, like I alluded to before, it's not really a traditional mixer where it's just the level of oscillator 1 against the level of oscillator 2. You've got these other elements here that are putting a bit more of an algorithmic approach towards the mixing of the two oscillators together. So I'll show you what I mean when I play this now. I'm going to play this on its own without the kick. And again, it's adding this kind of more algorithmic logic, as it says here, to a series of wave terrains that are created, which are then navigated by the two oscillators. The algo knob, which is short for algorithm, crossfades between the various terrains, essentially creating a three-dimensional terrain. So yeah, it's a different landscape essentially. So it's doing something a bit more complex than just merely mixing things together. And then bitter, in this mode, many bitwise operations. I mean, we could do a whole talk just on what bitwise operations are applied to the oscillators. Examples include XOR, which is like a kind of a cross modulation, interleave, bit shifting, etc. So it's working very much on the digital audio level. So you'll be able to hear this as well. So again, from there, you could add in an output from our friend here, the sine wave LFO, to control that over the course of, say, 8 beats. So you can hear very, very easily it's just become something really, really nice to be a driving force in the track. And then any sort of production, really. So what we can do here, I can just hit this button quite easily to save the current preset. And I'm going to do that again. And I'm going to call that Bucharest. A Bucharest indeed. So, as you can hear, pretty impressive. And one final thing that I'll show you is the ability to actually hit some really interesting randomizations, and you can see things have just changed there just for me doing that. So let's just have a little listen to what that has come up with. That's the risk you take with randomization, right? It kind of goes a bit crazy. Now, if you right click, you can decide what gets randomized, the main controls, the effects, or the modulation, whether or not it's completely changing or it just changes to, again, a particular depth, which I think is really nice, actually. 10%, as it was there. And again, it completely changed the sound just on 10%. So what's actually quite nice is the ability to go into, say, for example, I've got a few presets here that I've made already. Like, say, for example, we could go to this one here, Kiev. And again, we can play that. So let's say, for example, I right click and I say, actually, I want to keep the main controls the same. I want to keep the modulations the same, but I want to just modulate or completely randomize by 10% the effects. So then if I hit that, you'll see just those bits work. Cool. My multi-tap delay is going completely bonkers there. So yeah, you can go pretty damn crazy across the board. So yeah, I mean, this is what I've been doing with my Sunday. So yeah, this is out any day now. You can go on the Plugin Alliance website and you can get a 14-day free trial. So would highly recommend having a go at it, because especially if you're not great with synthesis and you're not great with sound design, I would highly recommend giving this a go, because A, it's very powerful, B, it's very visual, C, it sounds great, and also D, it's absolutely so simple to use, and you will learn so much about synthesis off the back of that. So again, not planned, but you know, why not? I'm sat here making sounds, so I may as well help you guys out by showing you what my process is. And again, you'll notice no other plugins involved, nothing from Ableton or any other company, just everything sounding great within the synth itself, which again plays into our whole less is more approach.